Let's start off. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Your background. Obviously, you've been a state senator, and any other information you'd like to share.
Sure. Thank you, Robert. First of all, thanks for having me in. This is a critically important election. I've been privileged to serve the people of the 49th Senate District for the past 6 years. And for those who might not know the geography of the district itself, part of Cayuga County, about a third of Onondaga County, all of Madison County, and part of Oneida County, the 49th District in the State Senate. Before having served, I was Vice President of Communications at the public television station, WCNY TV and radio in Syracuse. And then before that, had an opportunity to serve in the State Assembly as a staff member for Michael Bragman, Assemblyman Bragman from the North Syracuse, Cicero area. It has been a privilege for me to represent about 300,000 people here in Central New York in the Senate, fighting for better government, fighting for reform in Albany, which is absolutely critical, I think, fighting for job opportunities, fighting the tax issue and particularly the property tax burden that we have here in New York State, and certainly in the last 2 years, doing this in a climate of really the most serious, significant fiscal situation that this state has faced in generations. $25 billion 2-year cumulative deficit that we've had to close, and it's required making some very, very difficult decisions. I'm running for re-election to the Senate, and certainly asking voters to look at my candidacy, look at what we've been able to accomplish despite some very difficult times over the last couple of years, and to stay the course with change in Albany that I've articulated and acted upon. And I'm sure we'll have a chance to get to some of those specifics a little bit later, and I'd be honored to have their vote.
The economy is at the forefront of everyone's mind. What specific policies do you support to spur economic growth as we going into your next term? And to follow up on that, another question: what have you achieved in this area during the last 2 years in the state Senate?
Sure. Maybe we can look at the second question first, because I think it's important to look at some of the things that we've been able to be successful with. I believe that as you look at upstate New York and you look at cities and villages across the state, upstate from Albany to Buffalo, I think it's key that we take the kind of actions in Albany to help re-energize and reinvigorate our downtowns, our main streets across the state. One of the things that I have been spending a lot of time on in terms of the legislative process is drafting and getting passed into law an expansion of something known as the Historic Rehabilitation Tax Credit, a significant expansion, and then we were able to make some further enhancements as well just this past summer. This is a tax credit system that we now have in place here in the state that mirrors a federal tax credit that gives incentives for developers to come into downtowns in Auburn and Syracuse and Rome and Utica and Oswego and Rochester and all across upstate New York, and put into reuse older buildings, many of them having been used for manufacturing purposes over the years, that have fallen into disrepair and are no longer productive in terms of job opportunities for people. We have a tax credit system now in place that is spurring that kind of economic development. I was able to sponsor an expansion of the Main Street program, which provide grants to, again, villages and upstate cities across the state to focus much of our economic attention into reinvigorating our downtowns, our main streets and our downtowns across the state. So I think that's significant, and I'm anxious to continue that progress. We just this past year were able to enact into law a replacement for the Empire Zone program, which, as you know, expired earlier this year, with a new Excelsior program, which is designed to provide economic benefits to those companies across the state that make commitments to retain jobs and to create new job opportunities. One of the things that I think is very, very critical is that we are looking for ways to improve the business climate in the state, and specifically targeted to those businesses who are able to retain and create new jobs, as opposed to, for example, tax credit programs for corporations that then ship jobs overseas. And we've seen plenty of examples of that over the years. So I think that's the focus that we need to continue to have as we move forward. The other thing I would say is I believe it's very important to look at budget proposals, to look at pieces of legislation that might come before the Senate, and weigh their impact on the people that I represent. One of the things that we led the charge to defeat this year was a bill that would have imposed significant mandates on our farmers, on small family farms across upstate. The Farm Labor Bill is what it's generally referred to. We were able to, in addition with Senator Albertine, the chair of the Senate Agriculture Committee, he and I were able to lead an effort that resulted in the defeat of that legislation, the defeat on the floor of the Senate of that bill, which would have meant untold economic chaos for farmers across the state of New York. Agriculture remains the #1 industry in this state. So I think from an economic perspective, we need to continue to focus on positive ways to improve the business climate in the state, to reinvigorate our downtowns, and at the same time make sure that we're looking at issues and staying on top of issues that would have a detrimental effect economically, and doing everything we can to see that those in fact don't move forward.
You alluded to this earlier about the property tax cap.
Yeah.
How important was that for the state Senate to pass this year, and do you think the Assembly will come back to act on it?
Well, critical for us to pass. Actually, the Senate passed not once but twice a property tax cap bill that I actually co-sponsor. I am hopeful, and we know in recent days Governor Patterson has indicated that it is his intent to bring the legislature back to vote on a property tax cap bill. I feel quite confident in the Senate. We'll go back and continue to vote for it. It's the right thing to do. We need dramatic steps. We need to take dramatic steps in regard to our property tax burden. But the Assembly needs to do their part. We can pass a one-house bill till we're blue in the face. But until you have the Assembly pass a bill as well and get serious about property tax relief as we are in the Senate, and send a bill to the governor for his signature, then we see, in this case, the kind of tax cap and step in the right direction in terms of controlling property taxes in the state. This is a bill that, by way of background, would cap property taxes at 4% or 120% of the consumer price index, whichever is lower. In times like this, when we're in very, very difficult economic times, the 120% threshold is going to be lower, in fact, significantly lower than the 4%. In fact, if we had a tax cap in law right now, this year, the cap would have been 1.7%. So, you're going to hear all sorts of proposals from the candidates running for governor and others saying we need a 2.5%, 2%, wherever everyone else is, and they focus on the 4% in this bill. The important number to consider is the 120% of CPI, because until the economy improves significantly, again, that number is going to be far lower than any other number out there in statute. The other thing is it has built in to that legislation a mechanism where if school districts have unique circumstances and the voters in those districts have an issue that they're concerned about, there's a way for that cap to be overridden, but only by local school property taxpayers. So I think it's the right thing to do. I am certainly going to continue to push this issue. Again, I've already voted for it twice and will continue to vote for it. I'm hoping it only takes one more time for the Assembly to realize that it's the right thing to do as well, and we get that bill into law just as soon as possible.
Great. And a follow-up on the general tax issue. One of the criticisms leveled at yourself in this race and Senate Democrats stems from last year's budget, Republicans talking about the $14 billion in new taxes and fees that were passed. How do you defend or respond to those criticisms?
Well, first of all, I mean, the numbers that are thrown out there, one often wonders where they come from. I think a couple of things that are important to note in terms of the temporary surcharge on income taxes that was a part of last year's budget. That affects actually in the 49th Senate District, less than 2% of the population are affected by that. It's set at a financial threshold that frankly less than 2% of taxpayers in the 49th Senate District even would be impacted by that. Number two, I think if we look at the examples of tax increases that were proposed by Governor Patterson, either this year or last or both, that we were able to help lead the defeat of, I think it's very indicative as to where those taxes are. The kinds of regressive taxes, like a soda tax, for example, that the governor proposed this year, that is one of those nickel and dime taxes that become a burden to every person that would have to pay increased taxes for their soda products. But also, I firmly believe that it would have cost jobs in upstate bottling companies across upstate, certainly here in central New York as well. We were able to help lead the defeat of that tax. Gross receipts tax increases, for example, on hospitals and nursing homes. At the same time, when we are being required, because of our massive budget deficits, to cut support to hospitals and health and nursing homes and other healthcare organizations, why would we increase a tax on those very organizations that they're seeing their reimbursement rates cut because of the fiscal crisis? So we were able to lead the defeat of new taxes on hospitals, new taxes on nursing homes. And those are the kinds of things that I have focused on and would continue to focus on if the next governor sought to balance a budget next year with a reliance on taxes. And I think if you look at specific examples like that, I think we've been able to have success, and we'll continue to do so going forward.